Hey everybody, welcome to episode 78 of FoundersGyan and thanks for tuning in. This week we are talking to Kobby Osei-Kusi, the founder of thepearl.com, and our topic for the day is tips for hardware-based startups. Do check out the show notes over at foundersgyan.com/EP78 for links to all that we talk about on the show. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, everybody. Today we have a very special guest on the show. Joining all the way from San Francisco is Kobby Osei-Kusi. I'll call him Kobby for short. I'm finding it too tough to pronounce your last name, Kobby. Sorry about that. And Kobby runs a hardware-based startup called the Pearl.com. Kobby, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, same here. I'm excited to share our story, and thanks for all the good work you've been doing for entrepreneurs and people interested in the tech community.
Excellent, Kobby. So today we are going to talk about. We're just going to classify. I've just classified it as tips for hardware-based startups because we have come up with a bunch of questions. I think you guys are gonna love the various things that we are going to talk about. So, Kobby, before we get on to anything, can you give us a quick introduction about yourself and your company and what you do?
Sure. So my background is in developing large-scale power plants. I was working for a company that owned distribution assets, utilities, and power plants around the world, even including India, mostly in the US and Latin America, and in Africa. And before that, I used to work in finance. So I have an energy/finance background. And a couple of years ago, came up with this idea that batteries are getting cheaper. And you have, Tesla building things like the Powerwall. But they're still not cheap enough or smart enough where you can carry them around on a daily basis if you need them, especially with all the devices that we have. But also, no one had connected a battery to a smartphone to give you all the data that you need in terms of how the battery is performing. So that's the opportunity that we saw, which is batteries are going to get cheaper. They're going to get more common. We're actually going to carry them around a lot more, and it's important to know what the status of the battery is and get even alerts on how it's performing. So that's the opportunity that we found. I grew up in Ghana. I moved to the U.S. for college, and I've lived here since then, and have always been interested in technology and entrepreneurship. So when I found this opportunity, I quit my job and jumped right into it.
Okay, excellent. So for our listeners, you can check out The Pearl. That is THEPIRL.com, and what Kobby and his team are trying to do is great. They're trying to build a battery that's. I'm going to say it in very layman terms, Kobby. So forgive me if I don't get all the technical details right, but they're building a battery pack or a battery, a battery pack, you could say, that has a performance of about 70,000 milliamps. You could easily charge 6 laptops or I don't know, you could solve 8 tablets and so on, with a charging time of just about 3 hours for the battery pack to be fully charged. So I think it's a fantastic thing, and they're also going to do a Kickstarter campaign soon. We'll get into that towards the end of the show on what the plans are. So, Kobby, quickly, let's jump into some of the tips and questions for hardware-based startups. So, firstly, I think it's a great
Great sales job. Can we bring you on as head of sales?
Sure. Why not? Sure, definitely. I'm all for it. I love technology and I like people doing fantastic stuff. So I really liked the product. When I saw the product, I was super excited that you guys are doing some wonderful job. But I think let's get into the meat of the topic, which is all about hardware-based ideas. I think our listeners are getting a bit anxious now. So let's get on with it. So firstly, I think one of a very pertinent question that I have here is how to come up with hardware ideas. So I think that's something that's key, right? You need a decent idea. You don't need a great idea or a brilliant idea, but you need a decent idea as a starting point, right? So what are some of your tips and techniques to come up with good hardware ideas?
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you a story of how the Pearl idea came together. And I was at a conference, and the conference had maybe 3 or 4 outlets for 400 people. And those outlets were crowded, and everyone was trying to charge, their laptops, their phones, doing work while at the conference. And it dawned on me that why couldn't there be portable batteries that either the conference could give out to people or people could carry, that is light enough that they don't have to always be looking for outlets and disrupting their conference experience, and always being tied to the phone and always having to struggle to find where to charge it next. So I would say the first place to look for hardware ideas is look at problems that you're having yourself. What are your daily struggles with the tools that you use? These days we interact with a lot of hardware. I mean, we don't interact directly with software, we interact with hardware. And so as you go through your day thinking about what is painful, what is difficult, what is hard to use, and then try to imagine them being 10 times better, or try to imagine a solution that you yourself would use on a daily basis. That's probably the most important way of finding hardware ideas. Another sort of exercise that I do is when I look at all the tools that I use or how I go about my day, just try to think of, in 50 years, what would they be using? In 50 years, what would, assuming that there is no cataclysmic, world event where technology and progress reverses, but assuming things stay on the same track, what does the future look like? And then you can start to work from there in terms of ideas and products that you could make. So I would say look for ideas and problems that you have, and then try to think about the future and work backwards.
Okay, excellent. I think that's a great starting point. I think what you say is very correct. We interact with hardware, not software, and I can clearly understand your first step there on how we can think of making things better. Now, okay, so we have come up with an idea, and we now think that this hardware or this solution in terms of hardware isn't that good, and we can make it 10x better, or it can be made much better. So then comes the really hard part of prototyping that, right? So how do you actually move from, let's say, if for example you have been in the hardware field for a long time. You have been working with power plants and stuff like that. So you have a big, I guess you have a lot of background in terms of hardware. But for our would-be founders who don't have that, how can we move from an ideation to a creation or a prototype phase? Because I think this is slightly different than software, right? In software, I think it's much easier to move from an idea to a prototype. You can maybe even outsource it and stuff like that. But in the hardware, I think you need to design the entire hardware and make sure it works right in the first place. So what are some ways that we can approach that?
Yeah, sure. I'll share my story, which I think it's probably reflective of what a lot of non-technical founders go through. So my background is not in engineering, even though I've worked in energy and engineering for a good chunk of my career. So the first thing I did was I went online to this website called Dribble, where designers, industrial designers, post it designs. So I wanted to find someone who can help me draw, and get a 3D rendering of the product. And you pay a few bucks, you find someone, and you work with them. And it turns out that the person I found, and after we worked on the rendering of the product, which turned out to be very great, I shared with him the idea, and he took it and made it, beautiful. It turned out he was also a hardware engineer. So we started working together on the product, and over time he became my co-founder. So I would say for someone who has an idea, you want to turn it into a picture as soon as you can. And if you don't have the skills to do it, find someone who is an experienced industrial designer, and turn that idea into a picture. And the next phase after you have the picture is, so before I started working with my engineer, I went around to a number of industrial consulting firms and shared with them the drawing and said, this is what I want to achieve. This is the performance statistics that I wanted to have. Give me feedback. Give me, why it would work or it wouldn't work. And it was interesting that most of them said this couldn't work. You can't put that, you can't put 70,000 milliamp hours of battery performance in that much space. They just really push back very hard on it, and that was very helpful for me to know what quote unquote the experts are thinking. So I would say find a way to draw your idea, take it around to places to validate and get a sense of what the thinking around the product is, and that helps you refine the idea. And then in my case, I went back to my co-founder, and he said he could do it, regardless of what those guys, the consultants, were saying. And it turns out he was right. So that was my path. I'm sure there are plenty of alternate paths, but I would say picture, get it validated, and then speak to as many people as you can to find someone who can actually build it.
Okay, so when you talk about picture, you're talking about the look and feel. You're not talking about the actual hardware circuit inside it, right? That's the next step, right?
Correct. So in prototyping, there is a looks like prototype and there is a works like prototype. So the looks like prototype is what I have just described. Once you have a looks like prototype and you sort of mapped out what the functionality should be, your next step is to go to a works like prototype. And these days, it's quite relatively easy to get a works like prototype done. The main thing again is to have sort of the theoretical looks like prototype, mapped out correctly, so that you say, okay, if I connect A to B and B to C, it would actually work. So there are a number of ways to sort of get from the looks like prototype to the works like prototype. Here in San Francisco, there are a number of hardware meetups where you can go and share ideas with people, and they can help you point in the right direction in terms of how to actually get it done. But if you can't get it done yourself, you have to find someone who can do it, and then utilize your community, whether local or online, to find the cheapest and best resources to actually do it.
Okay. Great tips there, and I think great steps from moving from an idea to a actual prototype. Now, I think one of the points that you had mentioned before the call when we were having a chat is the design. So you were mentioning to me that having a unique design is very important. So can you talk about that? Why do you think having a good design or a unique design? I'm not sure if I got that right, whether you meant it was a good design or a unique design. So could you elaborate on that? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I think great design is absolutely critical, and even to a large extent, um, more important than functionality. Um, so great design um, involves how it looks like and how it is used. So it involves how the user interacts with the product. How do they hold it? How do they carry it around? What does it change in their routine or in their interaction? How is the user changing and how is the product changing? And so the best design tends to flow with a person's natural way of behavior. So I'll give you an example. When we looked at every battery product on the market, and none of them had a handle in a way where they could carry it easily along. And that was something that was quite surprising to us, because that seemed to be the most natural way. For example, when you're picking up anything from the ground, you want the handle to be at the top. So when I talked about good design, that was one thing that when we added and we showed to potential customers, they didn't even have to think about, how do I grab this thing and go, right? They just saw the handle, grabbed and go. They didn't have to think about it. Whereas if you look at other, products in our space, you have to like grab it from the side. Your hand can really fit all around it, and you have to find a way to put it in your bag. Whereas for our product, the handle is at the top. You pick it up and then you drop it, directly into your bag or, whatever carrying device that you have. So from the design standpoint, I think it's absolutely critical to design it so that it's a natural feel for the customer. And when you get it right, you realize that the customer doesn't have to think about it when he's interacting your product. It's sort of a natural extension to things that they would do naturally. It's hard to get it right from, just kind of thinking about it. You actually have to draw it and show it to a lot of people. And actually, in our case, we did. We bought a 3D printer and printed, a bunch of different designs. But when you get it right, you realize that the customer doesn't have to think about, how do I use this thing? It's very, very obvious and it's very, very easy to use.
Okay, great. I think that explains it very nicely why a good design is required, because I don't think people want to change their behavior when it comes to hardware. I think it should fit in with what they naturally do and use. So I think that's a great thing. Now, let's talk about your worst entrepreneurial moment and the lessons you learned from it, or maybe you could talk about your own experience of what maybe you would have done different, or what you wish you knew, before starting.
Yeah, the main thing I wish I knew was how long it takes for hardware startups to go from idea to functional product. Um, and and for large companies, it takes them anywhere between 2 to 4 years. And in our case, we thought we could do it, under a year. And we've been doing it right now. We're at the year and a half mark. So if that's one thing I wish I knew in terms of just mentally thinking of how long this would take, what to plan for, and how to stage it correctly. So that's probably kind of the main thing that I wish I knew or understood intimately. Because sometimes you know things intellectually, but you don't know them, viscerally. You don't know them, intimately. It's sort of like you nod your head and you're like, yeah, this sounds like right, but you don't really, really know how, so in this case, timelines, that's going to take. Um, but yeah, that's probably sort of the biggest thing I wish I knew. All the other stuff have been positive surprises. Every entrepreneur, you start off with, unless you're doing something that you've been doing for 20 years. So let's say, for 20 years, you have been building and designing car windshields, right? So you love it, or you have deep experience in it. But if you're doing something new, you usually are not sure whether is this the right thing to do. Am I passionate about it? Do I want to keep doing this for, until it succeeds? And until you step out, you're never really sure. But I would say after a year and a half of doing this, I'm very sure that I want to build hardware products, not software or anything else. I think the intersection between hardware and software is where I want to be, and I think that's it. These days the barrier to becoming a programmer is lower and lower, so you're going to see more software plays, and obviously for hardware, it's because of Arduino and all the prototyping tools, it's also getting cheaper to do it. But the intersection between hardware and software and great design, and obviously Apple is the perfect company in that place. I think that's where I want to build my capabilities and expertise. And even though I wasn't fully sure when I started this journey, I am now very, very, very sure that that's the place I want to be for the rest of my life. The marriage between hardware, software, and great design.
If you like this show, do follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The link is www.facebook.com/FoundersGyan and twitter.com/FoundersGyan. Both these provide you daily tips and articles as well as resources to help and inspire your startup. There are multiple tips per day. Some examples of these tips would be articles on the latest startups, growth hacking tips, how do you build team for startups, how to get funding, etc. So don't forget facebook.com/FoundersGyan and twitter.com/FoundersGyan. Okay, excellent. And you're also mentioning that it's almost 1.5 years now. So I believe you are about to launch a Kickstarter campaign soon, right? When can we expect some sort of a Kickstarter campaign, and when can this be available to the general public? Your product.
Yeah, so we're looking at second quarter, third quarter. So June, July this year, where we're gonna launch on Kickstarter. And we will probably do, in our case, we'll probably likely do a small Kickstarter campaign to get the initial product out into people's hands. In a sense where we will do it small enough that we can make all the initial product in-house. And then we want to get, a few hundred to a few thousand into people's hands, have them play with it, use it, get feedback, and then we will likely go industrial, after that, and incorporate the feedback into version 2. So we're looking at a slower ramp up than sort of most Kickstarter plays.
Okay. So I wish you luck. I wish you good luck with that. Now, if you have a hardware idea. So we already talked about the move from idea to a prototype and also touched on design. So what next? I mean, we get the prototype and then we give it to some users, get feedback, and then launch a Kickstarter. What's the play that we need to do once we have this?
Yeah, once you get to the Kickstarter phase, you start to realize that there are lots of supporting systems in the ecosystem. What I mean by that is there are lots of companies that are there to help you take your idea from, prototype / after Kickstarter to actually manufacturing, delivering, getting, product recalls or customer feedback returns. So at that level, you're starting to interact with, lots of firms. So there are some that are pure consultants. So for example, there's, some that would work with, some that have manufacturing partners in China. So, here I would work with them and use their experience in China to actually, make the product. You would find, some that are just pure manufacturers and can do all of it in-house, you'd find some that would, partner with you and, spread it, across different firms. You have to decide whether to manufacture, in our case, to decide whether to manufacture in China or in the US, what the supply chain looks like, what the pricing looks like, which is a really critical piece of all of this. Obviously, if you don't do a Kickstarter, you have to think about fundraising. But once you have a product that, even a small group of customers really, really love it, there is an ecosystem of support. And I'm only speaking from the US experience here, but at a certain stage, you realize that, okay, there are many players that are out there that can help you get your product into the hands of the masses.
Okay, excellent. Now, what are some of the key things to keep in mind during all these phases? The initial prototyping, testing, funding, finding manufacturing, delivering. What are some of the key things to keep in mind during across these phases?
Yeah, in hardware, for some reason, people are very, very driven by price. And so you have to be very conscious of what your product is going to cost, how much margin you're going to make, and also you have to make a decision whether you want to play in the very high end space or you want to make a commodity product. So I would say thinking about pricing is very important. But I think the overall the overall thing to keep in mind is always to make something that a lot of people want. So it's got to be something that is meeting a critical need, and it's got to be something that your initial customers are just raving about it, and they're asking you, when is it going to be done? When can we try it? That's the most important thing.
Okay. And what are some of the things not to do? What are some of the biggest pitfalls? I would put it that way.
Don't start thinking you're going to be the next, Apple. Don't be copying what the big guys do. Just don't be reading about, Apple did XYZ, so you're going to go do the same thing. Don't spend a lot of money at all. There are just so many ways to do things really cheaply that there's just no point in spending, a lot of money. In our case, we've made certain decisions. We have a 3D printer. We order, all our testing parts. We use very, very cheap parts when it comes to just testing and prototyping, so that we don't, so that we learn quickly. In our final product, we're going to use, the most high quality parts. But, right now we order, really cheap transistors, motherboards, for the prototyping phase. And when the other thing is when we first started, I did a lot of sort of external stuff, which is, I did like business plan competitions, went to pitch at a bunch of different events and meetups, spoke to a lot of investors, and those weren't great uses of time. The only thing that really matters is making a product and making sure that a lot of people love the product. Once you have that, other things like investors, funding, marketing, it would all grow from there. So if I had to do it again, I wouldn't spend time on, pitching and competitions and stuff like that.
Great advice there, Kobby. And I also think I just want to add one more thing which you previously said, which is don't underestimate the time it will take for you to get your product out to the market, right? I think that's another key component in especially in hardware. You said it takes between 2 to 4 years, so I think that's also something to keep in mind and not get frustrated or give up quickly because you need to keep that time in mind, right?
I agree, and now it makes sense why, if you just open your eyes and look at all the products that you use in your daily life, most of them suck. Most of them are actually really bad products. And now I understand why they are such bad products, because it is just very, very hard to get good products, good hardware on market. It's just a very, very hard process. So the status quo just tends to be, just lots of average to bad products. But once you understand the process, you realize that, okay, if you're able to sort of break through with a great product, then it's going to be very hard for people to copy you, because it's hard to put up, I mean, I've always been very, very surprised that the iPhone has been out for almost 10 years and no one has made a better phone. I mean, Samsung has competed with them, but Apple still captures most of the profits in the smartphone industry. And side by side, I mean, there's a lot of arguments about it, but side by side, Apple still makes the best smartphone. And, you have billion-dollar companies that can basically take what Apple's doing is copying it, but it's very, very hard to copy. It's very hard to do stuff in hardware. And people don't appreciate it until you actually start doing it. But when you get it right, you can be a very dominant player. If you're commodity hardware, I think a lot of people can copy you from China, and put in, very crappy product. But if you make a great product that is not a commodity product, you're going to own the market for a while.
Okay, excellent ideas and advice there. We're just coming to the close of the interview. I just have a couple of final questions. So let's talk about some places where we can get help, sources of help in terms of hardware products. I know this might be very American specific since you're there, but I'm sure there are equivalent things here in India and other places around the world. So where do you turn to help for when you're in the hardware based space, startup space?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with a couple of things that are available to everyone globally, and then maybe go specific to more American stuff. I apologize for the noise in the background. I'm at a coffee shop. But globally, first of all, you can always reach out to the manufacturers. And you can always get, so for example, we've reached out to Texas Instruments, and they're very eager to help young companies. And so they will send you samples of new chips that they are working on. If you need chips, sometimes they'll give it to you for free, right? So that's a free resource. So reach out to all the manufacturers of parts of the components of the product that you're using. Ask them, tell them what you're doing. And a lot of times you can get free samples. So that's one resource. The second one is obviously online design forums like Behance and Dribble, where you can find and even post up your designs and have people comment on them. That's open and free to everyone. The third one would be reaching out to manufacturers early on in the process and saying, this is what I want to do. What does it cost to manufacture? What do I need to think about as I'm designing the product? So one of the things is, there's something called SMT manufacturing, surface mounted technology, which is, placing everything on a flat surface circuit board so that it's a pick and place manufacturing process, and that's very cheap to manufacture. So as you're designing, you want to keep those concepts in mind. And to find that out for what you're doing is to reach out directly to manufacturers. Again, that's free and open to everyone in the world. The things that are US specific that I think are very helpful are just hardware incubators and hardware meetups. So there's Highway 1, there's Bolt, there is, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's 5 or 6 specific hardware incubators that are very helpful to speak to or go through their programs.
Okay. I'm sure there are some equivalent here in India. So and across the globe. So I think so. Those are great tips and a great source of help for people who are trying to make a mark in the hardware space. Now, uh, are you a reader? Can you recommend maybe top three books, two or three books for our budding founders? I mean, if it's something to do with hardware based things, startups, yeah, great. Otherwise, general startup. Otherwise, any other books that inspire you, if you're a reader.
Yeah, I'm a big reader. I'm a very, very big reader. And I think the world is getting so complex that I don't think people who are not big readers, I don't think they can succeed, or I think they reduce their chances of success because the world is just so complex now that you have to read to know the interrelationships between things. So I highly recommend reading. I spend just a lot of time on it. So a couple of books. The Wright Brothers was a very powerful book for me. Talked about the brothers as they were building the plane, and around that time, there were lots of people trying to build the first, flying object. And what is interesting is that, the U.S. government funded this famous professor in Washington, D.C. He was sort of the head of a museum. They gave him a ton of money to build the first plane. And the Wright brothers in Ohio, scrappy bicycle repair mechanics, used, very cheap parts, stuff that they worked on, and they built the plane, right? So that was a very powerful book for me because it means that don't be afraid of the large, well-funded companies. In fact, they're actually at a significant disadvantage for a lot of, for many reasons. They're just big. They can't think with the thinking of two people and an idea and a very scrappy plan. So the Wright brothers is a very powerful book for hardware founders. Another book that I've found sort of general help is a book by this guy called Edward De Bono. It's called, I think, A Course on Thinking. And, he goes through sort of ways to help you think about things correctly. And I've never seen any college class or any course that teaches you how to think properly. But if you think about it, all your actions come from thinking. And so where you need to spend most of your effort is thinking correctly. And if you can think correctly, you can save yourself a lot of effort and a lot of wasted, time. So I think, especially in hardware, you want to be able to think correctly so that you can project ahead and work through things. I think a classic example is, obviously Elon Musk and, how he talks about thinking from first principles. So again, I haven't seen anyone, except that book that really talked about how to think correctly. It saves you time and money and effort. So I think those are sort of two books. There are lots of other books. I mean, Ben Franklin's biography was another, very, very good book in terms of someone who was a generally very astute person, but in some ways he was a hardware, entrepreneur. He built, he tested electricity with a flying kite. He built so many products, bifocal lenses. So it talks a little bit about how he came up with his ideas. And then another book is the biography of Thomas Edison. And that's actually interesting because, Edison and Nikola Tesla were contemporaries. And Nikola Tesla followed, he was very, very bright. And so he could think about things and didn't need to experiment on them as much to get to the right answer. Whereas Edison was the opposite, where Edison was probably not the best conceptual thinker. So he had to try things 1,000 times to get it right. And that was very interesting, very enlightening. And it made me realize that I'm probably more of an Edison type person where I just need to do things, 1,000 times until I get to the final answer. But there's some people who are very, very good high-level conceptual thinkers, and they can get to the right answer after 2 or 3 tries. So those are 4 books for you.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for those, and we will link all that up on the show notes, along with. And before I go on to the final question, how can our listeners get in touch with you? Obviously, they can go to thepearl.com, that is thepirl.com. I'm sorry if I'm again pronouncing it wrong, but that's one place where they can check out your product and join the waiting list, get to know when the product will be released. But apart from that, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startup founders, would be entrepreneurs listening on the show. What's the best way to reach out to you personally? Email, LinkedIn, Twitter. What are you most active on?
Email is the best way. So it's Kobby, KOBBY at thepearl, THEPIRL.com. So it's Kobby at thepearl.com, and happy to help or respond to any questions that people have.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So with that, I will also link that up on the show notes. So with that, we'll move on to the final question. So as part of Founders Gyan, this is the last question that I ask on the show. So Gyan is a Sanskrit word, so which means knowledge or wisdom. So just imagine that nothing you spoke about is ever gonna air. Only one of your Gyan, only one Gyan will be airing. So what is your one Gyan to startups with regard to hardware and hardware related ideas?
I would say imagine big and take small steps. Imagine big and take small steps.
Excellent, excellent, Gyan. Kobby, it was great talking with you. I know we are out of time. There are so many questions we had thought of, and I wish I'm sure I could talk to you for another few hours. Also, you have so much knowledge and wisdom, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. So we will have to close out the interview. But it was great talking with you, and I wish you continued luck and success. And I'll be personally I'll be joining in your waiting list, and I'll be personally waiting. I mean, I can't use the product in India, but I'll be personally waiting to see your Kickstarter campaign and how it goes. And I wish you all the good luck with that right away, since it's coming very soon.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Kobby. With that, we will end the interview. Thank you very much. Any last words?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a lot from other people, so happy to share. Even though we're not a big success yet, we're just really happy to share everything we've learned on the journey.
That's it for today, folks. Hope you found this episode both interesting and useful. You can check out the show notes at www.foundersgyan.com/EP78, and also check out www.foundersgyan.com for all our older episodes. I'll be back next week with yet another founder and an interesting topic of discussion. In the meantime, do take action on your own startup today. Good luck and bye for now.